History books celebrate Rome's glory, the invincible legions, the brilliant generals, the aqueducts, the roads, the laws that shaped civilization itself. But certain documents were never meant to survive. A military report preserved in the British Museum dated to the reign of Trajan. A letter discovered in the ruins of Pompeii written by a legionary named Marcus Flavius. Commercial inventories found in Alexandria listing cargo manifests with disturbing precision. These fragments tell a different story, a story carefully excluded from school curricula and cinematic epics alike, because some truths are too unsettling to present openly. This is what those documents reveal. Rome had won. The legions came home, and with them arrived something history books rarely linger on. Picture it for a moment. You are standing on a dust-choked road in the year 70 AD. The air is dry. The sun hangs low and merciless. In the distance, a triumphal procession moves steadily toward the eternal city. Banners ripple in the wind. Bronze armor flashes beneath the light. Thousands of boots strike the earth in perfect rhythm. The legions march in flawless formation, an image of order, discipline, and victory. And among them, bound together with iron chains, are hundreds of women. Their eyes are hollow, their faces slack with exhaustion. Many already understand something terrible, that death would have been kinder than what lies ahead. They march not as prisoners in the modern sense, but as proof, living evidence of Rome's absolute power. Why don't they teach this? That is the question we must ask. Why do films show heroic gladiators, but never what existed just beyond the arena walls? Why do textbooks celebrate Julius Caesar's military genius, while forgetting that his campaigns in Gaul resulted in the enslavement of hundreds of thousands of women and children? The answer is simple and disturbing. Rome became the civilizational template for the Western world. To fully confront the systematic nature of Roman sexual violence would require questioning the foundations of that admiration. So instead, we choose elegance. We choose silence. We focus on aqueducts, on architecture, on law. But the documents do not lie. And this is their testimony. Jerusalem burned in the 8th month of the year 70. The siege had lasted 4 months. 4 months of starvation so complete that mothers ate their own children. 4 months of disease that turned the streets into open graves. 4 months of hope dying 1 degree at a time until hope itself became a distant memory, a luxury no one could afford. Sarah Bat Joseph stood in the tunnel beneath the Temple Mount and listened to her city die. She was 17 years old, the daughter of a scribe. A girl who could read and write in Aramaic and Hebrew, who had learned some Greek from merchant traders, who had believed with the innocent certainty of youth that knowledge might protect her from the chaos of war. Her father crouched beside her in the darkness. Joseph the scribe, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that had spent 40 years reading sacred texts by candlelight. He had wrapped the Torah scrolls in oilcloth and hidden them in his robe. Even now, even as the world ended above their heads, he believed these words mattered more than the survival itself. The earth shook. Dust fell from the tunnel ceiling. Somewhere above them, the temple was burning. Sarah could smell the smoke, could hear the screaming, the sound of 10,000 people realizing that their God had abandoned them. Her father touched her shoulder. His hands were trembling. "We will survive this," he said. "The Romans are civilized people. They have laws. They will take prisoners, but they will not slaughter everyone. We will survive." Sarah wanted to believe him. She was 17. She wanted very badly to believe that the world made sense, that cruelty had limits, that civilization meant something. The tunnel collapsed 3 hours later. Not completely, just enough to trap them, just enough to ensure that when the Roman soldiers came searching, when they dragged survivors into the daylight, Sarah and her father had nowhere left to run. A legionary found them at dawn. Young man, maybe 20 years old, sunburned face beneath a bronze helmet. He held a gladius, the short sword that had conquered the known world. The blade was clean. He had not killed anyone yet that morning. Sarah would remember that detail later, the cleanness of the blade, as if that mattered, as if it made any difference at all. Joseph stood, he raised his hands. He tried to speak in Greek. The soldier drove the sword through his chest without hesitation, without anger, without anything at all. A technical movement, efficient, practiced, the way a farmer might slaughter a chicken. Joseph fell. The Torah scrolls spilled from his robe. The soldier kicked them aside. Sarah did not scream. She had no air left in her lungs. She simply stared at her father's body and understood with sudden terrible clarity that knowledge did not protect anyone, that words on scrolls meant nothing, that civilization was just a word people used to describe organized violence. The soldier grabbed her arm. His grip was iron. He dragged her up into the light. The courtyard of the Temple Mount had become a sorting ground. Thousands of prisoners, men separated from women, children separated from mothers. The elderly pushed aside, the wounded left to die, everything ordered, everything systematic, everything according to procedure. Sarah saw men lined against the western wall, saw the execution squad moving down the line, saw bodies falling, one after another. Efficiency without mercy, the machine processing human beings into corpses. A centurion walked among the women. He was older, 40 perhaps, gray in his beard. He carried a small clay pot filled with red ochre dye. Behind him came a scribe with a wax tablet making notations. The centurion would stop, would examine a woman, would sometimes mark her shoulder with the red dye, would move on. Most women he did not mark. Most women he simply looked at and dismissed. Sarah learned later what the marks meant. Prima classis, first class, reserved for commanders, the most physically desirable, the youngest, the ones who might survive long enough to be profitable. She was not marked. That should have been a relief. It was not, because she understood what it meant. She was allocated to common soldiers. She was second-tier merchandise, sufficient for the rank and file, but not worthy of officers. A soldier grabbed her, forced her to her knees, grabbed her hair. Sarah looked up at the sky, found 47 cracks in the stone ceiling above her, counted them, focused on counting, let her mind go somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere that was not this courtyard, not this moment, not this body that no longer belonged to her. When it was over, the soldier stood, said something in Latin to his companion, laughed, walked away. Sarah stayed on her knees. She could not stand, could not move, could not think. Around her, 200 other women knelt in similar stillness. Some were crying, some were silent. 3 had found pieces of broken pottery and opened their own wrists. They bled out slowly while Roman soldiers stepped over their bodies. Night fell. The soldiers returned. Different ones this time, more of them. The routine established itself with horrifying speed. This was not chaos. This was organization. This was Rome. By morning, 3 more women were dead, suicide by hanging. They had torn strips from their own clothing and used ceiling beams. 2 others had stopped speaking, stopped moving, simply stared at nothing with empty eyes. Sarah was not dead. She had not gone silent. She had made a choice in that first night, a choice she would spend the rest of her life questioning. She had chosen to survive, had chosen to count the ceiling cracks, had chosen to go somewhere else in her mind, had chosen not to die. Now she had to live with that choice. On the 3rd day, they brought the branding irons. The smell came first, burning charcoal, heating metal. Then the screaming started. Woman after woman, dragged forward, held down, the iron pressed against flesh, the scar that would mark them forever. Sarah's turn came. 2 soldiers held her. She did not struggle. Struggling only made it worse. The iron came toward her face, glowing orange, the letters clear even through the heat shimmer. LEGX, Legio Decima Fretensis, the 10th Legion. The legion that had destroyed Jerusalem. The pain was absolute. White fire across her left cheek, the smell of her own flesh burning. She heard herself scream and did not recognize her own voice. When they released her, she touched her face, felt the raised scar tissue already forming. A brand, like cattle, like property. A permanent mark that would announce to everyone who saw her exactly what she was. Not a person, not a human being with a name and a history and a father who had died trying to protect her. Just merchandise. Just cargo marked for transport. The march to Caesarea took 5 days, 100 kilometers. Women chained together in groups of 10. Sarah was number 7 in her chain. Number 3 collapsed on the 2nd day. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, despair. The soldiers tried to make her walk. She could not, would not. They dragged her for an hour, a body weight pulling on the chain, scraping along the road. By the time they stopped for the night, she was dead. They removed her from the chain and left her body by the roadside. No burial, no prayer, just meat rotting in the sun. Sarah did not look back. They reached Caesarea on the 5th day. The Mediterranean stretched before them, blue and infinite, beautiful. Sarah had never seen the sea before. She stared at it and thought about drowning, about walking into those waves and never coming back, about choosing the water instead of whatever waited across it. But she did not walk into the sea. She walked into the warehouse. It was massive. Stone walls, high ceiling, rows of amphorae stacked along one wall, barrels of grain along another. And in the center, chained to iron posts, 89 women from Judea, merchandise waiting for transport. An old woman sat near Sarah, gray hair, hollow eyes, scar on her cheek from a brand that had healed years ago. She looked at Sarah's fresh burn and nodded slowly. "I am Ruth," the woman said, "from Galilee, captured 5 years ago." Sarah did not answer, did not have words. Ruth leaned closer, lowered her voice. "Stop praying for rescue," Ruth said. "There is no rescue. Pray for numbness instead. Pray that your mind learns to separate from your body. Pray that you forget who you were. Because the girl you were died in Jerusalem. This is someone else now, someone who can survive what is coming." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was still herself, still Sarah Bat Joseph, still the scribe's daughter who could read Greek. But she knew Ruth was right. That evening, a man entered the warehouse. Well-dressed, clean hands, a merchant. He carried a wax tablet and stylus, began reading aloud. An inventory. Cargo manifest for the ship that would depart in the morning. 340 amphorae of wine, he read, 120 barrels of wheat, 89 women from Judea, 14 Berber horses. Sarah heard herself listed, heard her existence reduced to a number between grain and livestock, heard the casual precision of it, the bureaucratic efficiency. She was cargo now, not human, cargo with a purchase price and a tax assessment and a projected profit margin. The merchant finished reading, left the warehouse. The door closed, locked from outside. Ruth touched Sarah's hand in the darkness. "Find something to hate," Ruth whispered. "Hate keeps you alive longer than hope. Hope will kill you. But hate is fuel." Sarah thought about that, thought about her father dying, about the soldier's clean blade, about the red ochre marks, about the brand on her face, about being listed between wheat and horses. She found hate. It was not difficult. Hate was easy. Hate was everywhere. The ship departed at dawn. They were loaded last, after the wine, after the grain, after the horses, down into the hold, below the waterline. Darkness, the smell of tar and brine and human waste, chained in rows. Sitting position, not enough room to lie down, not enough room to stand, just enough room to exist in permanent discomfort. 89 women, packed into a space designed for 40. The ship's captain walked among them once, looked them over like livestock, nodded to himself. "Acceptable," he said to the first mate. "We might lose 20, 25% on a crossing this long, but that is within normal parameters. The profit margin accounts for attrition." Attrition, a word that meant death, a word that made death sound like a business expense. A predictable loss factored into the ledger. The ship moved. The Mediterranean swallowed them. 6 weeks of darkness and thirst and disease. 6 weeks of women dying one by one in the fated hold while the wine and grain remained perfectly preserved in the deck above. Ruth taught Sarah how to breathe shallow, how to conserve energy, how to stop thinking about tomorrow, how to exist only in the present moment, because the future was unendurable and the past was gone. On the 8th day, they stopped at Cyprus. The hatch opened, light flooded down. 12 women were dead, their bodies hauled up on deck and thrown overboard. No ceremony, no prayer, just weight released into the sea. The hold was hosed down with seawater. The living were given water, 1 cup each, a handful of grain paste. Then the hatch closed again. Darkness returned. On the 15th day, a storm hit. The ship pitched. The chains bit into flesh. Women screamed, prayed, begged gods who did not answer. The hold filled with vomit and seawater. For 6 hours, Sarah thought they would sink. thought the sea would take them all, thought it might be mercy, but the storm passed. The ship survived. They continued west. Sarah was chained next to Ruth. They did not speak much. There was nothing to say. But Ruth's presence was something, a small anchor. A reminder that survival was possible because Ruth had survived 5 years. 5 years of this. 5 years of whatever waited at the end of the voyage. On the 32nd day, Ruth stopped eating. Refused the grain paste. Refused the water. Sarah tried to make her drink. Ruth turned her face away. "I am done," Ruth said. Her voice was dry, cracked. "I have seen what waits in Rome. I will not go back. I choose this instead." She died 3 days later. Fever, dysentery, starvation. Her body went up on deck with the others, thrown into the Mediterranean somewhere between Crete and Italy. Her final resting place was unmarked water, infinite and anonymous. Before she died, Ruth had gripped Sarah's hand. Her last words were barely a whisper. "Find something to hate," she said again. "Hate keeps you alive." Sarah nodded. She understood. Ruth had given her the only gift possible. Permission to hate. Instruction in survival. A legacy passed from one dying woman to another who would continue. The ship reached Ostia in October of the year 70, 43 days after leaving Caesarea. 63 women survived from the original 89, a 71% survival rate, within acceptable parameters. The captain was satisfied. They were unloaded like the wine, like the grain, like the horses, transferred to wagons, transported to Rome, to warehouses that stored them alongside commercial goods while they waited for the auctions. Sarah sat in the darkness and counted. She had been counting since Jerusalem, counted days, counted miles, counted everything because counting gave her something to focus on besides the reality of where she was and what was happening. She had survived 43 days at sea, had survived the march from Jerusalem, had survived the first nights in the temple courtyard. She had survived when others had not. That survival meant something, or it meant nothing. She was not sure which, but she was alive. And being alive meant she could still hate, could still count, could still exist in whatever broken form existence now took. A woman sat down beside her, Greek, older, maybe 30. She had kind eyes. That surprised Sarah. She had forgotten that kind eyes were possible. "I am Lydia," the woman said, "from Achaia, captured 6 years ago. I have been through the auctions twice. I can teach you words, Latin words. They will keep you alive." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why help me?" Lydia shrugged. "Because someone helped me once," she said. "Because small kindnesses are the only rebellion left to us. Because you look like you might survive. And survival is worth something, even if we do not yet know what." Lydia taught Sarah phrases, simple Latin, functional Latin, the language of obedience and submission and survival. "Yes, master. As you wish. I understand. I will obey. Thank you for your mercy." Phrases that tasted like ash, but phrases that might prevent a beating, might prevent worse, might buy another day of existence. Sarah learned them, memorized them, added them to her collection of survival tools. Counting, dissociation, hate, and now language. The words of the conqueror forced into her mouth. Lydia explained the system. The auction would come soon. Buyers would inspect them, would check their teeth like horses, would examine their bodies, would assess value based on age and appearance and perceived intactness. Most of the women from the ships were no longer intact. That lowered their value, but it did not make them worthless. Everything had a price. Everyone could be sold. Young women went to brothels or elite households. Older women went to farms or mines. Sick women went to places where life expectancy was measured in months. The system was efficient. The system wasted nothing. Sarah would likely go to a brothel, Lydia said. "You are young, you can read and write, that is exotic, valuable, and you are marked as Judean, that is valuable too, right now. While the conquest is fresh, while Romans want to celebrate their victory over your people, you are a trophy. That will save you from the mines, but it will not save you from what the trophy means." Sarah understood. She was not stupid. She knew what brothels were, knew what her life would become. The knowledge sat in her stomach like lead. The auction came on a bright morning in late October. They were taken to the Forum, to a massive plaza near the center of Rome. Hundreds of people, merchants, patricians, common citizens, all come to buy. Sarah was stripped, stood on a wooden platform, made to turn slowly, rotate so the crowd could see every angle, every scar, every imperfection. Buyers walked close, touched her, examined her, opened her mouth to check her teeth, pressed fingers into her flesh to assess muscle tone, conducted pelvic examinations in full view of the crowd to verify her condition. A sign hung around her neck, written in Latin and Greek, Judea, 17 years. Can write, the bidding started. Two men competed, a wealthy patrician who wanted an educated household slave, and a brothel owner named Gaius Mercator, a fat man with cold eyes and the smell of wine on his breath. Gaius won 800 denarii, a high price. Sarah learned later that this sum represented 3 months of a legionary salary. She cost more than most soldiers earned in a quarter year. She was valuable. She was investment property. She would be maintained because maintaining her protected the investment. Lydia was sold to a different buyer, a wealthy widow who needed a Greek tutor for her children. They were separated, dragged in different directions. Lydia called out one final piece of advice. Remember, Lydia shouted, you are valuable. Valuable things do not break themselves. Sarah held those words, wrapped them around herself like armor. Valuable. Yes, that was true. She had value, and value meant she would be kept alive, even if alive meant something she could not yet comprehend. Gaius Mercator owned a brothel near the Colosseum. Large establishment, 12 cells. He specialized in exotic merchandise. One woman from Britannia, 2 from Germania, 1 from Egypt, and now Sarah, the Judean, fresh from the conquest, a trophy from Rome's latest triumph. The building was stone, narrow, cells arranged along a central corridor. Each cell was 2 meters square. A stone bench with a thin mat, no window, a curtain for a door. Graffiti covered the walls, Latin, Greek, Aramaic, names, prayers, curses, tally marks. Evidence of the women who had been here before. Evidence that Sarah was not the first, would not be the last. Gaius explained the business model. He was proud of it. Spoke like a merchant describing a successful enterprise. You are an exotic, he said. Judean. From the conquest. Men will pay premium rates for that. 3 to 5 asses per visit. Cheap enough for commoners. Expensive enough to signal quality. You will see 15 to 20 clients per day. More during festivals. You will be fed. You will be given basic medical care. Because you are an investment. Because your value depends on your condition. You have perhaps 3 to 4 years before that value begins to decline. After that, we will discuss other arrangements. Other arrangements, Sarah understood. She would be sold again, to the mines, to a farm, to death. But that was years away. That was future. Right now, there was only this cell, this mat, this curtain, this first day. The first client arrived at dawn. Sarah counted the tiles on the floor. 42 tiles. She focused on them. Let her mind go to the tiles. Let her body become something else. Something separate. Something that was happening to someone else. The second client arrived an hour later. She counted the cracks in the ceiling. 17 cracks. The third client made her vomit. She vomited between his visit and the fourth. Gaius was angry, told her to control herself, told her vomiting reduced efficiency, reduced profit. She was valuable. She needed to behave like it. By nightfall, 8 men had visited her cell. 8 in one day. Sarah lay on the mat and stared at nothing. She could not cry, could not think, could only exist in the hollow space where her mind had fled. This was the routine. This was her life now. This was what survival meant. The weeks blurred together. October became November. November became December. Sarah stopped counting days, started counting visits instead. More useful metric, more honest accounting of what her existence had become. By the end of the first week, 63 visits. By the end of the second week, 119. By the third week, 184. The numbers climbed. The tally marks on the wall multiplied. Sarah carved them with a broken piece of pottery, thin lines in groups of 5. Evidence, record, proof that this was happening, proof that she was still conscious enough to count. She learned to read clients. Drunk men were easier. They finished quickly. Sober men took longer. Nervous men were fastest of all. Young soldiers visiting a brothel for the first time, awkward and quick and sometimes apologetic. Those were the easiest. The ones who still felt something resembling shame. But most men felt nothing. For them, this was ordinary. For them, Sarah was a service, like a bathhouse, like a tavern, a place you visited, a thing you used, nothing requiring thought or guilt or recognition of humanity. One client stood out. His name was Decimus, young legionary, 22 years old. He recognized the brand on Sarah's face. Legion 10. He had served in that legion, had been at Jerusalem, had seen the siege, had been part of the conquest. He visited Sarah's cell in early December, paid his fee to Gaius, entered, looked at her, then sat on the floor. "I cannot do this," he said, "not to you, not to anyone from Jerusalem. I was there. I saw what we did. I am sorry." He sat in silence for the full hour he had paid for, then left, did not touch her, just paid the fee and left. He returned every week, always the same. Paid, sat, apologized, left. Sarah did not understand him, did not trust his apologies, because apologies changed nothing. He was still a soldier, still part of the legion, still complicit in the system. His guilt was a luxury, a performance. It made him feel better without requiring him to actually change anything. But she did not tell him that. Just let him sit, let him speak, let him leave. He was easy money for Gaius. And Sarah had learned that easy was valuable. By March of 71, Sarah had been in the brothel for 6 months. She had counted every visit, 2,847. That number lived in her mind. Permanent, undeniable, evidence of what survival cost. She had watched 2 women commit suicide, had watched one go completely silent and still, had watched Gaius bring in new women to replace them. The machine continued. The system processed human beings into profit. Nothing interrupted it, nothing slowed it. Sarah had become senior among the women, not by choice, just by lasting. She taught the new German girl basic Latin. The survival phrases Lydia had taught her, "Yes, master," "As you wish, I understand," the words that might prevent a beating, the words that acknowledge reality. In late December, Sarah overheard Gaius talking with another brothel owner. They were discussing Christian arrests. The emperor was cracking down on the new cult, rounding up believers, making examples. One name was mentioned, Prisca of Britannia, a slave woman who had converted, who refused to renounce her faith, who would be executed in the arena in April as public spectacle. Sarah did not know Prisca, had never met her, but the name stayed with her, lodged itself in her mind. A woman who had chosen death over compliance, a woman who had looked at the system and said no. Sarah thought about that, about choosing, about whether any choice remained when all options led to suffering. She did not have an answer, but the question would not leave her alone. April came with warm wind and bright sun. The city prepared for games, gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and executions. Public displays of imperial power, entertainment for the masses. Gaius took Sarah to the Colosseum, a reward, he said, for good behavior, for profitability, for surviving 6 months without causing problems. She was a model investment. She deserved to see the spectacle. They sat in the upper tiers, the cheap seats, the arena floor spread below them, massive, sand-covering stone, blood from earlier fights already soaking into the ground. The Christian executions came last. 20 prisoners, men and women, dragged into the arena in chains. The crowd cheered on, shouted insults, threw refuse. Prisca was among them. Sarah recognized her from the announcer's description. Britannia woman, 33 years old, captured 8 years ago during the campaigns under Nero, slave in a Christian household, converted to the new faith, arrested 3 months ago, refused to sacrifice to the emperor cult, condemned to die. She was small, thin, scars on her arms and legs, brand on her shoulder. She walked without stumbling, without crying, without begging. They tied her to a post in the arena center. An official approached, began the ritual interrogation. The questions were for the crowd's entertainment. Everyone knew the outcome. But the performance mattered. The display of power required witness and response. "Do you renounce your faith?" the official asked. "No," Priska said. "Do you acknowledge the divinity of the emperor number? Do you fear death?" Priska looked at the crowd, looked at the imperial box, looked at the scamam. When she spoke, her voice carried across the arena. Clear, steady, unflinching. "I told them I had already died many times," she said. "They killed me the night my village burned. They killed me on the march to the sea. They killed me in the ship's hold. They killed me the first time a Roman man called me property. Death before the lions will only confirm what is already true." The crowd fell silent, just for a moment, a brief stunned pause at the audacity of it, at the refusal to perform the expected fear. Then the silence broke. Shouts, jeers, demands for blood. The lions were released, 3 of them, starved. Trained for this, they moved across the sand, slow at first, then faster. Priska did not scream, did not beg, just stood against the post and stared at the animals, at death approaching. She welcomed it, chose it, made it hers. The end came quickly, 30 seconds, maybe less. The crowd cheered, moved on to the next prisoner, the next entertainment, the next death. Sarah sat very still. Something had broken inside her. Some wall she had built to protect herself from thinking too hard about what her life had become. Priska's words echoed. Already died many times. Already dead. That was true. Sarah had died in Jerusalem, had died on the ship, had died 2,847 times in 6 months. She was already dead. This body still moved, still breathed, still counted. But the person she had been was gone, had been gone since the moment her father fell, since the moment the first soldier touched her, since the moment she chose to survive. Priska had chosen death, had taken back the one choice the system could not control, had died on her own terms, with her words intact, with her defiance clear. Sarah had chosen survival, had chosen numbness, had chosen to count and dissociate and hate quietly without resistance. Which choice was right? Which choice was braver? Which choice mattered? She did not know, could not know. Both women were dead, or both were alive in different ways. Priska was meat in the arena. Sarah was meat in a cell. Different forms of destruction, different paths to the same erasure. 1 week passed. Sarah could not stop thinking about Priska, about her words, about her choice, about the clarity of it, the finality, the control. A client arrived, older man, merchant, drunk. He paid Gaius, entered Sarah's cell, collapsed on the mat, fell asleep almost immediately. Sarah looked at him, looked at the dagger on his belt. He had forgotten to remove it. Careless, stupid. The blade was right there within reach. She stared at it for 20 minutes while he snored. 3 options presented themselves with perfect clarity. She could take the dagger, kill him, try to escape. She would be caught, would be crucified. Slow death, public death, death that made an example. She could take the dagger, turn it on herself, end this. Choose what Priska chose. Quick death, chosen death, death with control. She could do nothing. Let him wake, let him leave, survive another day, another week, another year. Continue in the pattern that had sustained her this far. Sarah reached for the dagger. Her hand hovered over the hilt. She could feel the weight of it, the possibility, the door opening to something other than this endless routine. She thought about Priska, about already being dead, about the truth of that statement. She was dead, had been dead. This body still moved, but the girl who had counted ceiling cracks in Jerusalem was gone. That girl had died when her father died, when the brand burned her face, when the first client entered her cell. She thought about Ruth, about hate being fuel, about hate keeping you alive when hope fails. She thought about her father, about Torah, about the teaching of Pikwach Nefesh, the preservation of life, the commandment to choose life even when life is suffering, even when life is unbearable, even when life has become something unrecognizable. She thought about Lydia, about valuable things not breaking themselves, about survival being worth something, even if the value was unclear. Her hand moved away from the dagger. She pulled it back, placed it in her lap, sat in silence while the merchant snored. The man woke an hour later, stood, saw his dagger still on his belt, looked at Sarah, seemed to realize how vulnerable he had been, how easily she could have killed him, how easily she could have escaped or ended herself. He left quickly, did not say anything, just left. Sarah sat alone in her cell. The choice had been made, or refused. She was not sure which. She would continue, would survive, would count the next visit and the next and the next, would live consciously with what was happening, could not return to numbness now. The wall was broken. She would have to exist fully awake in this hell. That was her rebellion, small, invisible, meaningless to anyone but herself. To continue while unbroken, to survive while staying conscious, to refuse both death and complete surrender, to exist in the narrow space between those extremes. It was not Priska's clarity. It was not Ruth's hate. It was something else, something she did not have words for. Just continuation, just being, just the stubborn insistence that she was still here, still counting, still Sarah Bat Joseph, even if no one else remembered that name. News reached Rome in June of 71, a slave rebellion in Hispania. 18 women had killed their owners in the middle of the night, had tried to escape, had been caught within 3 days. The ringleader was a Germanic woman. The reports called her only the red-haired one. No other name, just that description. Red hair, Germanic origin, approximately 30 years old, a slave for 6 years. She was brought to trial, public trial. The magistrate asked why she had committed murder, why she had broken the peace, why she had violated the natural order. The woman spoke once. Her words were recorded, preserved, repeated. "You taught us that the world belongs to the violent," she said. "We only practiced the lesson." She was crucified. All 18 women were crucified, lined along the Via Appia, left to die slowly, a warning to other slaves, a reminder of what rebellion cost. Sarah heard the story from Gaius. He told it as a cautionary tale, as evidence of the futility of resistance, as proof that the system was stronger than any individual defiance. But Sarah heard something else in it, heard an echo of Priska, heard another woman who had chosen, who had looked at the options and picked violence, who had turned the lesson back on the teachers. That could have been me, Sarah thought. I could have taken the dagger, could have killed the merchant, could have tried to run, could have ended up on a cross. But I did not. I chose differently. Was that cowardice? Was it wisdom? Was it simply the randomness of circumstance and temperament and the particular shape of suffering each person could or could not endure? She did not know. The women on the crosses were dead. Priska was dead. Sarah was alive. Those were facts. The meaning of those facts remained unclear. Time moved. Seasons changed. Rome continued. The machine processed new shipments, new conquests, new prisoners, new merchandise. April of 72 arrived. Exactly 18 months since Sarah had been sold at auction. 18 months in the brothel. 18 months of clients and counting and survival. She had marked every visit, carved every tally mark. The wall of her cell was covered with them. Rows and rows of thin lines, groups of 5. A visual representation of what her life had become. She counted them one morning, counted carefully, made sure the number was exact. 8,460, 8,460 men. In 18 months, an average of 15.7 per day, some days more. Festival days could be 30 or 40, some days fewer, but the average held steady. The machine was efficient. Sarah stared at the number, tried to comprehend it, could not. It was too large, too abstract. Each number was a person. Each person was an experience. Each experience was a small death. 8,460 small deaths, and she was still breathing. Gaius entered her cell that afternoon. Unusual. He rarely spoke to the women directly unless there was a problem. "You have been profitable," he said. Very profitable. Your exotic value is holding well. Better than I expected. You may have another year, perhaps two, before we need to discuss renewal. Renewal, the word Lydia had warned her about. The word from the medical text. The text by Cyrannus of Ephesus, the Roman physician who had written that brothel owners should renew their stock every 3 to 4 years. That after this period, the merchandise lost commercial value and productive capacity. Renew the stock, as one might replace cracked jars. Sarah understood. She had perhaps 1 year left, perhaps two. Then Gaius would sell her, to a mine, to a farm, to whatever market existed for used merchandise. Her value was finite. Her utility had limits. The system would extract what it could and discard what remained. That evening, new women arrived. A fresh shipment from the Germanic frontier, 200 prisoners from a recent campaign. Young women, frightened, branded, chained. Sarah watched them processed, watched them sold, watched them distributed to brothels across the city. The same procedures, the same efficiency, the same reduction of human beings to inventory categories. One girl was brought to Gaius's establishment. Germanic, 16 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, terror in her face. She spoke no Latin, no Greek, nothing useful. Gaius put her in the cell next to Sarah's. The girl cried all night, screamed during her first clients, vomited, begged in a language no one understood. Sarah listened through the wall, heard herself 6 months ago, heard the same sounds, the same desperate incomprehension, the same belief that this could not be happening, that someone would stop it, that the world made sense. The next morning, Sarah taught the girl Latin, the same phrases Lydia had taught her. Yes, master, as you wish, I understand. I will obey. Thank you for your mercy. The girl learned, repeated the words, did not understand why these particular words mattered. But Sarah explained. These words prevent beatings. These words signal compliance. These words are survival tools. Memorize them. Use them. Live. The girl nodded, wiped her eyes, began to practice. Sarah watched her and understood. She was Ruth now. She was Lydia. She was the woman who had survived long enough to teach the next generation how to survive. The cycle continued. The pattern repeated. The machine processed new fuel while discarding old. Nothing changed. Nothing would change. The system was too large, too entrenched, too profitable, too normal. It had operated this way for centuries, would operate this way for centuries more. Individual women lived and died. Individual stories of suffering accumulated and vanished. But the system remained. Sarah returned to her cell, added 5 more tally marks to the wall, counted the total again. 8,465. Tomorrow would add more. The day after would add more. The counting would continue until it stopped, until Gaius decided her value had declined, until she was sold, until she died in a mine or on a farm or in some unmarked place where used merchandise was discarded. She lay on the mat, stared at the ceiling, at the 17 cracks she had counted on her first day. They were still there, unchanged. Permanent features of stone that would outlast her and every woman who passed through this cell. She thought about Prisca, about already being dead, about the truth of that. She had died many times, but she was also alive. Both things were true. Contradiction and paradox and the stubborn refusal to resolve into simple meaning. She had survived. That was the fact. Survival was not victory, was not defeat, was just continuation.